Bloodvale Court, Case File 4, The Bone Lantern Procession. Chapter 1, The Vale Without Watchers. Layman Vale was not always cursed. Built during the 7th morning cycle, it was meant as a sanctuary, a haven for children displaced by Vale breaches, famine, and plague. Orphans, many without names, kin, or closure, were gathered here for rites of stillbirth, shallow soil memorials, and spirit-tethered adoption. Oversight waned, stewards thinned, salt rations failed. By the time the court returned to audit the orphanage, it had gone silent. No records remained, no children were found, only graves, unmarked, too many, too shallow. Court scribe annotations suggested over 70 children had been held at Layman Vale during its final 3 seasons. The last census was unsigned, a page was recovered, ash-smeared, sealed with bone ink. They never learned their names, so the earth could not keep them. The head steward was later found hanged within the bell tower, her mouth sewn shut with red thread. The bell never rang again. The haunting began with songs, not music, but humming, out of season, out of place, in fields, in halls, beneath floorboards, always childlike, tuneless, drifting between breath and memory. Then the prince appeared, barefoot, small, leading from the graves, but not toward the town, toward Dowers. 3 years after the last burial, a procession was seen on the hallowing moon, children walking through fog, lanterns of bone in hand, threads of red tied around their wrists. They did not knock, they stood and stared until someone inside remembered. Once, a midwife screamed, "That's my son, but I never buried him. I was told not to look." Her home burned that night, no flame touched her neighbors. Ash was found in her bed, shaped like a cradle. The court now refers to these children as echo-born, manifestations not of soul or spirit, but of grief refused. They are not undead, they are not ghosts. Memory with weight, and memory, when denied rest, does not fade, it walks. Caretakers who served at the Vale have gone mute, not by trauma, not by injury, by weight. Their tongues turn to stone in sleep, their teeth crumble, they dream of being small, alone, and buried face down. None remember their own names upon waking. Some scrawl unfamiliar ones on their walls, child names, names never recorded. The court has declared Layman Vale a red silence zone. No rites allowed, no excavation, no naming. Those who speak the orphans' names aloud find mirrors cracking, fireplaces going cold, and shadows arriving early. Even now, red thread appears in trees around the region. Sometimes it humps, sometimes it tightens. Grief buried does not die. It waits, it grows teeth. Unattributed margin note, sealed court report. Chapter 2, The One Who Looked Back. Alvar Tannick was found standing outside the collapsed Layman Vale Chapel. He was clutching a sprig of lavender, a bone doll wrapped in red silk rested in his other hand. No tracks surrounded him, his eyes were closed, yet he whispered, "Little Belle is coming back." She was the first to go, and the last to be forgotten. Alvar's tongue was partially petrified, his voice altered, his eyes reflected no light. He responded only to questions regarding the procession. When asked about the veil, he said, "We weren't supposed to speak our names. The matron said it gave the dark things hooks, so we called each other by color. I was gray, there was blue, thread, Little Belle, and Ash." "Did you see what happened to the others?" the interviewers asked. "Not happen, undo, one by one. They forgot, not sleep, not F, just gone. I'd look away, and the bed was made. No one knew who had slept there. The walls moved when it happened, just slightly, like they exhaled." He survived because he looked back. During the last procession, all the children lined up, hands tied in red. The matron walked ahead, lantern unlit, humming the song the dead know. But I turned around, I looked back, and I saw who was following. What he saw were them, not light, not breath, not voice, only remembrance. Their hands were clean, cleaner than ours ever were, and their faces, we remembered them wrong. They remembered themselves better, sharper, closer to the truth. "The truth," he said, "is that no one grieved them. Names unspoken grow fangs. The veil does not keep the dead out, it keeps the forgotten in." After looking back, he saw the matron smile. For the first time ever, she vanished mid-step, leaving only a whisper of thread and dust. The others followed a cleaner, remembered. He stayed, because someone had to remember the names never spoken. When asked to say their names, he began to cry ash. Vocal patterns stuttered. Attempts halted. No, but I can show you where they stand. They come back on fog nights. They're waiting for someone to finish the hymn. The hymn, he explained, is the red thread one, the song hummed when burying something that cannot be forgiven. That night, candles failed. Interviewers reported nausea, auditory hallucinations, and memory degradation. One vomited red thread. The chord notes, Alvar held the lavender sprig and bone doll, no tracks were around him, his eyes were closed, he whispered of Little Belle, the first unremembered, waiting to return. The echo-born were no longer just stories. They were memory made manifest, waiting, growing teeth. Chapter 3, Little Belle. Little Belle was the first child no one buried. Her name wasn't hers. It was what the other orphans called her. Her true name was lost, swallowed by hollow fire purge. She appeared small, pale, and laced with soot beneath her fingernails, eyes veiled over like frost glass, mouth restrained at the corners with red silk, a tiny brass bell stitched into her collarbone. It rang softly whenever she moved. Witnesses felt her presence before they saw her. Sudden quiet, the scent of burned honey and marigold, an overwhelming urge to speak a name they had forgotten. Alva remembered her. She wasn't the first to die. She was the first to be unremembered. We stopped calling her name, even in play. Said it sounded like crying when we spoke it. She stopped casting shadows after that. The gray requider reported the moment she appeared. The bell rang. The ink in my ledger curled. Names I had etched that morning, gone. One page simply read, "You left her out." Her manifestations were strange and terrible. 1. The corridor bloom, bell sounds in sealed corridors, portraits reversed on the walls, charcoal scrawls. She remembered them. Why didn't you? 2. The night of tide tumps, residents woke with mouths bound by red thread, all could hum, humming matched the cadence of the burial hymn, pause. 3. The bell garden, outside Layman Vale ruins, ground disturbed as if by bare feet, tiny brass bells unearthed, each still rang despite rust and soil. Little Belle was not a ghost, not a spirit, not a revenant. She was memory made flesh, tethered by grief denied. Where Ash walked among misnamed dead, Little Belle walked in the silences where no one had spoken. She was the whisper before remembrance, the hush before the hymn. The court concluded, even the smallest name, when forgotten, grows sharp in the dark, and Little Belle waited, echoing what the world had refused to see. Chapter 7, Hollow Wind Awakens. The town of Hollow Wind was quiet. Too quiet, windows shuttered, lanterns dim, children nowhere to be seen. The fog rolled low, crawling through alleys and doorways, curling around lampposts like fingers. The bone lantern procession had passed, but its presence lingered. In the well, water shimmered with unspoken names. In the marsh, reeds hummed the buried lullabies. Footsteps echoed where no one had walked. The first disappearance occurred 3 nights after the hollow moon. Rick Andel, age 9, his shoes left neatly at the doorstep. The door swung shut, and he was gone. No trace, no sound. Investigator Tenware and Scribe Emrich found the first lantern near the salt flats. Bone, aged, flickering with pale light. They called to it. Nothing answered. It waited, patient. Then the townsfolk began to see them. Children, shadows of children, pale as ash, eyes veiled, hands tied in red thread, walking through the fog in perfect line, barefoot, silent, lanterns swinging, chimes faint, names whispered under their breaths. Some who tried to follow vanished, some returned days later, but changed, veil thickened skin, tongues stiffened, half stone, eyes hollow. They whispered only fragments of forgotten names. Judge Iller issued a warning. Do not pursue, they are not lost, they are the echoes of names abandoned. Alvar Tenek walked with them through the town. He did not speak, he only remembered. Names rose from the ground at his feet, gray, blue, thread, ash, Little Belle, each a whisper, each a wait. A brass bell rang faintly in the distance, not loud, not urgent, but it carried across the fog, a summons or a warning. No one could tell which. Hollow Wind would never be the same. Where memory had failed, the echoes remained, and the bone lantern procession continued south, toward the heart of forgotten grief, toward Layman Vale. Someone had to remember, someone had to finish the hymn, or the procession would never end. Chapter 8. The Bell in the Marsh. The marsh lay still. Too still. The fog had thickened, swallowing sound and light. Footsteps sank into soft mud, leaving no mark. Every reed whispered names no one dared speak aloud. A faint chime, a bell, brass, small, hanging in the mist. It rang, not sharply, not loud, but it drew the living toward it. Alvertenek led the way. He did not speak. His eyes reflected nothing but fog. He paused only when the bell's tone shifted. He knelt, touching mud, listening to the echo beneath. And there she was, little Belle, barefoot, smaller than memory should allow, frost-glass eyes, red silk tied at the corners of her mouth. The bell on her collarbone rang softly with each breath. She did not move toward them. She did not flee. She waited. Her presence pushed the fog back like a tide. It revealed shapes beneath. Children, echo-born, names whispered in the wrong order. The air smelled of burned honey and marigold. Ivar's hand trembled. He wanted to speak, to name them, but the veil pressed in. Voices rose from the mud. Finish the hymn. Remember us. Do not forget. The lanterns floated closer. Each child held a light of bone. Each light pulsed with the memory of her life ungrieved. Their steps were silent, but the weight of them pressed on the world. Little Belle's bell rang once more, a single note that cut through fog and thought. It was not music. It was command. It was grief made audible. Scribe Emrich tried to write. The words curled and burned to ash on the page. Tenware tried to bind them with salt. The salt dissolved before touching the ground. Nothing could stop him. Alvar knelt and whispered a name. Just one. The fog recoiled. The lantern swayed. Little Belle tilted her head. The bell chimed again. The procession shifted. And then, they began moving. South, toward Lehman Vale. The marsh exhaled. The echoes followed. And one thought rose in every mind that watched. Someone must remember all the names, or the lanterns will never sleep. Chapter 9. Red Thread Raising. The fog thickened as the procession moved. Red threads glinted in the lantern light. They were tied to wrists, ankles, and collars. Some hung loose, swaying like cobwebs. Others wrapped tight, leaving marks that would never heal. Little Belle led, her small frame barely visible beneath the shroud. The bell at her collarbone rang softly with each step. Each chime a call to remember. The echo-born followed in silence, their faces pale, eyes veiled, names unspoken. Alvertenek walked beside her. He remembered no warnings. Do not look back. Do not speak their names. But his hands itched to trace the threads, to untangle grief. A sudden breeze carried whispers, not voices from the living, nor cries from the dead. Memory itself seemed to speak. You forgot us. You buried us wrong. Finish the hymn. The marsh began to stir. Reeds bent as if bowing. Mud shifted beneath invisible feet. The lantern swayed faster. The procession's rhythm quickened. The red threads pulsed, alive, tightening in unison. A caretaker's echo appeared, stone-tongued, silent, her eyes hollow, her mouth bound with red silk. She mimed the burial rites no one had completed. Alvar watched. His own tongue felt heavy. Could he speak the names? Could he finish the hymn? Suddenly, one lantern floated ahead, alone, its bone handle cracked and worn. From it, a voice whispered. Remember her. It was a name no one dared speak. Little Belle paused. The bell on her chest chimed 3 times. The red threads flared. The echo-born shifted, rearranging in silence. The veil pressed closer. Fog became weight. Air tasted of ash and salt. Alvar faltered. His knees sank into mud. He reached for the threads, for guidance, for courage. The lanterns turned as one, eyes veiled in frost glass fixed on him. He knew the hymn must be finished, or they would never rest. Above, the hallowing moon glowed, not silver, not white, but a dim, sickly blue. Its light fell on names not spoken, graves never dug. The marsh hummed with memory. The lanterns moved onward. Little Belle's bell rang again, and Alvar whispered the first name, the first of many. The red threads tightened, guiding, bonding, calling. The procession surged, and Alvar understood. The burden of remembering was his alone. Until the hymn was complete, the bone lanterns would follow. Chapter 10. Arrival at Lehman Vale. The trees thinned. The fog lifted just enough to reveal the ruins. Lehman Vale, a name spoken only in whispers. The orphanage stood as a skeleton of wood and stone, its walls scorched and hollow, windows like empty eye sockets, staring. Little Belle led the procession into the courtyard. Her bell rang softly, echoing off broken bricks. The echo-born followed, barefoot, shrouded, silent, the red threads pulled taut, guiding each step. Alvar Tennick hesitated at the threshold. He remembered the warnings of the Bloodvale Court. No rites, no naming, red silence zone. Yet he knew the procession could not stop without him. The courtyard was littered with the graves, shallow, unmarked, and forgotten. Ash drifted from the walls. Bones lay scattered in patterns that made no sense. And somewhere, a bell rang. Soft, distant, impatient. Little Bell paused at the center. The air changed. Silence deepened. Memory pressed against the walls. Alvar could hear the hum of unspoken names, a chorus that tugged at the edges of his mind. Remember us. Say our names. He knelt. His fingers brushed the first grave. Ash crumbled beneath his touch. He spoke a name. Just one, and the red threads vibrated. The echo-born shifted, nodding, waiting. The wind carried whispers of the forgotten. Gray, blue, thread, ash, Little Bell. Names not spoken for years. Names that had grown sharp in the dark. Little Bell moved among the graves, her bell ringing with each step. She traced threads around Alvar's hands, guiding him. The first hymn began, low and tuneless, a song of grief denied and memory reclaimed. The echo-born joined in, humming in unison. The air thickened, the veil trembled. Each name spoken burned through the fog, light piercing the lingering dark. And Alvar understood. This was not just a ritual, it was reclamation. The orphaned, the forgotten, the unacknowledged, all returned through the red threads, the bell, the hymn, and until every name was spoken, the Bone Lantern procession would not end. The first chapter of remembrance was complete, but the work had only begun. Little Bell's bell rang once more, a soft, insistent chime, a call to continue, to remember all. Chapter 11, The Awakening of the Echo-born. The fog thickened around Layman Vale. Every step Alvar took echoed in empty corridors. Little Bell's bell rang again, a sound sharper than before. It drew the echo-born from shadow corners, their small hands clutching bone lanterns, their red threads taut in the cold air. They moved as one, but not in unison, each child a fragment of memory, a shard of grief denied. Their eyes veiled, yet they sought everything. Every forgotten name whispered back at them. Alvar's throat ached as he prepared to speak. Each name he had memorized clawed at his mind. He hesitated. The first voice rose above the others, small and brittle. "Why do you hesitate?" He whispered gray. The threads pulsed. The lantern in his hands shivered. A hum rose from the echo-born, a tone neither mournful nor joyful, but resolute. Blue followed. Thread. Ash. Each name a spark cutting through the fog, each syllable reclaiming what had been lost. The children's bell chimed in response, a soft chorus of recognition. Little Bell moved closer. Her small hands guided Alvar toward the shallowest grave. He felt the weight of every unspoken name, every memory twisted and trapped beneath the soil. Then came the pause, the silence after the hymn. It was a test. The veil quivered. The echo-born haunted, their small bodies still, listening, waiting. "Have you remembered them all?" Alvar's lips trembled. He knew the answer. No, not yet. He had begun, but the names stretched beyond memory, beyond human voice. The lanterns flickered. Blue light danced in the fog. The threads tugged at him, insistent, demanding he continue. The echo-born leaned closer, their bell ringing faintly, a sound of encouragement and warning. Alvar took a deep breath. He spoke the next name. The hum rose louder. The lanterns glowed brighter. The veil shimmered, revealing glimpses of graves long forgotten, and shadows that had waited in silence. The process had begun. Every name reclaimed would bind the echo-born to memory, not oblivion. Every syllable would feed the Bone Lantern procession, guiding it south, toward what must be remembered. And Little Bell stayed at Alvar's side, her bell soft but insistent, the smallest voice, yet the loudest call. "Remember, all of us." Chapter 12, The Veil Trembles. The fog shifted. A low, bitter wind blew through Layman Vale. The veil itself seemed restless. Alvar followed the procession, lanterns bobbing ahead, red threads linking one small hand to another. Every step left a faint scorch of memory in the soil. Little Bell's bell rang sharp and sudden. The echo-born stopped. The silence pressed against Alvar's chest. The wind whispered names, some known, some lost, and carried the scent of burned honey and marigold. A shadow moved in the distance. Not a child, not a lantern, something darker, something waiting. "Do not look away," Little Bell's voice whispered, though her mouth was still sewn. Alvar felt the threads tighten. The veil shivered in response. Veins of silver light crawling across the fog. The echo-born began to hum, their tune echoing the buried hymn, layered with unclaimed grief. Suddenly, the ground trembled. Graves shifted beneath unseen weight. Lanterns flickered, bones rattling softly in rhythm with the heartbeats of the forgotten. Alvar turned to see the first of the cleaned echo-born, those who had been remembered and returned from the beyond. They were pale, sharper in their forms, faces clearer than memory allowed, and their eyes, they were not empty, they were judgment. The procession slowed. Threads hummed in Alvar's hands. The wind whispered again, "You are the keeper now." The veil pushed back, a force of cold and silence, attempting to reclaim what had been disturbed. Lanterns swayed. Little Bell's bell rang louder. Alvar spoke a name, another. The veil shrieked. The fog rolled back. The echo-born pressed forward. Memory fought against the darkness. Every unspoken name found a voice. Every lost soul found a tether. Every forgotten child became a weight on the veil, pulling it toward remembrance. The lanterns led Alvar to a mound of soil, shallow and forgotten. A name rose in his mind. Trembling, he spoke it. The ground shivered. A faint light glowed beneath. A small hand emerged. Little Bell leaned close. Her bell rang once, then twice. The veil shuddered. The echo-born hummed louder. The procession moved south, and Alvar knew this was only the beginning. Chapter 13. The Hallowing Moon. The night was thick with fog. Lanterns swayed like distant stars caught in the mist. Each bone handle glowed faintly blue. Alvar followed the procession silently. Red threads pulled taut across wrists, guiding him along a path older than memory. The air tasted metallic, like the ash of forgotten fires. Little Bell moved ahead, her bell chiming softly, a sound sharper than any knife, cutting through the fog. The echo-born mirrored her steps, their bodies smaller, paler, yet impossible to ignore. The first veil breach appeared, a ripple in the air, dark as spilled ink, stretching across the marsh. The fog twisted, forming shadows, faces unseen yet familiar. Alvar hesitated, one step forward, and the ground felt wrong, hollow beneath his feet. Memory pressed against him like weight. "Do not falter," Little Bell's bell whispered. The echo-born began to hum the burial hymn, layered voices, some shrill, some soft, all resonating with grief denied. The veil convulsed. Shadows reached for the procession. A figure stepped forward from the darkness, tall, silent, veil-stained. No face, just reflection. It moved as if drawn by the threads. Alvar's hands shook. The lanterns pulsed in response. Little Bell turned toward the intruder. The bell rang once, piercing, clear. The shadows recoiled. The veil shrieked. But the echo-born advanced, fearless. Memory carried them forward. Alvar felt the threads tighten, pulling him closer to the mound of unmarked graves. Names rose in his mind, trembling and bright. One by one, he spoke them aloud. The ground shifted beneath him. Light broke through the fog. The veil swirled in anger, but the lanterns blazed brighter. The shadows faltered, faces flickering and vanishing. The hollow air hummed, a chorus of the remembered and the unforgotten. Little Bell's bell rang again. The procession moved as one, pulling the darkness behind them, drawing the veil into the weight of memory. Alvar realized he was no longer following, he was leading. The hallowing moon hung above, watching silently, and for the first time, the marsh felt alive, not with death, but with remembrance. The echo-born pressed onward. The bone lantern procession would not stop. Chapter 14. The Cleaned. The fog thinned slightly as dawn approached. Lanterns still hovered, pale and deliberate, casting bone shadows on the marsh. Alvar felt eyes on him, not from the echo-born he knew, but from something sharper, more precise. A child-shaped figure emerged from the mist. Its skin was flawless, its eyes mirrors of memory long erased. Little Bell stopped and tilted her head. The bell at her collarbone rang softly, warning Alvar. The figure stepped closer. No voice, no breath, only recognition. Alvar spoke the first name aloud. The figure shivered, and a faint blue glow traced its outline. It was him, but not him. The clean echo, the one remembered by someone else, somewhere, but never by him. The marsh whispered. Threads of red tightened around wrists. The clean moved with purpose, not malice, but with the gravity of what was owed. Alvar felt the weight of forgotten names pressing against him. He trembled. Each step forward was a choice, to run, or to acknowledge the children lost. The cleaned held out its hand. Alvar hesitated, then touched it. A surge ran through him, like the collective grief of centuries pressed into one heartbeat. The bell rang sharply, echo borne along behind Little Bell. The clean mirrored every movement, perfectly synchronized, but not a copy, a reminder of memory honored elsewhere. The veil quivered, darkness recoiled from acknowledgement. The marsh softened beneath their feet, names whispered in the wind, carried into the bones of the earth. Alva realized something terrifying and beautiful. This procession was not punishment, it was reclamation, a reckoning of forgotten lives. The clean knelt before Little Bell. The small bell chimed louder, rising above the fog, a call for memory to follow. Alva understood. They were teaching him, showing him how to lead. He whispered another name aloud. The lanterns pulsed brighter. The clean smiled, though no lips moved, and the fog bowed, revealing the marsh not as emptiness, but as the ground of remembrance. Little Bell's procession moved onward. Alva followed, now part of the living memory, carrying names, carrying grief, carrying hope that the Bone Lantern procession would grow stronger. The marsh held its breath. Chapter 15. The veil trembles. The night was heavy. Mist clung to the marsh like wet cloth. Lanterns of bone floated ahead, pulsing with pale blue light. Alvar's feet sank slightly into the softened earth. Every step felt like wading through memory. He could hear whispers, half names, half regrets, skimming the surface of consciousness. The veil was stirring, not like before. Now it moved with intention, pressing against the lantern glow, stretching, reaching for what it had kept hidden too long. Little Bell led, silent, her bell ringing softly. Behind her, the echo-born fell in line, each a living pause in a song of grief. Alva realized the lanterns were not just lights, they were threads of remembrance, pulling at the edges of the veil itself. A shadow rose from the fog, not a child, not a spirit. It was the veil, its darkness thick, malleable, hungry. It whispered his failures, the names he forgot, the promises left unkept. Alva faltered, the fog thickened, voices of the echo-born rose, not in fear, but in song, the hymn of the buried, threaded through the red of their wrists. The veil recoiled at the sound. It had not been sung properly in decades. Each note struck a chord of memory long denied, and the darkness pulsed unevenly, like a heartbeat out of rhythm. Alva raised his voice. He spoke the first name he had learned from memory. The lanterns pulsed brighter. The echo-born moved with him, their small hands gripping lanterns tighter, their eyes reflecting recognition. The shadow of the veil shuddered. It seemed almost alive, almost intelligent, but for the first time, it hesitated. Its tendrils brushed the marsh lightly, fearing the weight of grief that had been acknowledged. Little Bell stepped forward. Her bell rang, loud and insistent. The veil drew back further, like a tide retreating from shore, revealing the marsh in its hidden form, soft, pliable, full of life yet unseen. Alvar's chest burned. He understood now. This was not just a confrontation. It was a negotiation. Each name spoken, each memory honored, pushed the veil back. Every forgotten child reclaimed weakened its hold. The lanterns began to move faster, forming a circle around the shadow. The echo-born hummed a hymn, a lullaby turned weapon. The veil roared, and the wind carried the sound of shattered silence. When it ended, there was only quiet. The fog lifted slightly, revealing marsh reeds bending patterns of light. Alva realized he was standing on the threshold of something far older than grief, something waiting for names to be spoken. Little Bell looked back at him. No words, just the ringing of her bell, and the promise that the procession would continue, that memory could fight, and that forgotten children could walk again. Alva whispered another name. The veil recoiled again, and for the first time, he felt the weight of hope, carried in the hush of Bone Lantern light. Chapter 16. The Cleaned. The fog had thickened again. Lanterns glowed faintly, almost hesitant. Alva could hear them before he saw them. Small footfalls over soft earth, the faint ringing of brass bells. And then he saw her. Not Little Bell, someone else. A child, tall for her age, face pale but flawless, eyes reflecting nothing but light. Her hands were clean, too clean. She moved toward the procession. No hesitation, no fear. Her lantern was not bone. It was pure, smooth, untouched by decay, and inside, a flame that swallowed shadow whole. Alva felt it first in his chest, a tug of memory, a pull of names he had tried to forget. The cleaned had come for him, for the part of himself that had ignored grief. The child's eyes lifted. They saw him, not as Alva Tannic, but as gray, the boy who had looked back, the one who had remembered. Her lips did not move, no sound came, and yet, Alvar heard the hymn, the red thread song, inside his mind, each note perfectly aligned with the beat of his heart. A wind passed through the marsh. It carried the scent of burned honey, marigold, and ash. The echo borne behind her shivered in response. Some bent low, as if bowing. Others reached out, trembling, their fingertips grazing the light. Alvar took a step forward. Who are you? His voice trembled, and the marsh seemed to hold its breath. The Clean tilted her head, her lips parted slightly. A single word echoed in his mind. Remember. He stumbled backward, heart racing. The veil stirred again, tendrils curling toward the lanterns. But the Clean did not flinch. She stood between memory and shadow, a living hinge of what had been forgotten. The echo-born whispered faintly behind her. Names Alvar could barely catch. Children from Layman Vale. Children he had never spoken aloud. Children he had failed to grieve. And then the Clean moved closer. The light from her lantern washed over Alvar, and he felt it, the weight of the unspoken names, the faces of those forgotten, the hunger of grief left untended. He fell to his knees. The hymn rose louder in his head, the brass bells of the other children ringing in response, and he knew this was not punishment, it was reckoning. The Clean extended her hand, not to touch, but to guide. Remember, the voice said again, and Alvar understood that he would never forget, never again. The lanterns all swayed as one. The procession began to move, not away from the veil, but through it, through shadow, through fog, through memory itself. Alvar rose, following the Clean, and for the first time, he felt the weight of hope, carried not in light alone, but in remembrance. Chapter 17. The Veil Stirs. The marsh fell silent after the Clean moved through. Not a whisper, not a ripple, only the soft chime of distant bells. Alvar walked behind her, heart pounding. Every step felt heavier than the last. The fog thickened, curling around his legs, but the lanterns kept their rhythm. The bone lantern procession moved with purpose now. The veil responded. It pulsed in the air, a living, hungry thing, stretching its tendrils toward the procession, reaching for forgotten names, for grief unspoken, for memory buried too shallow. The Clean stopped. The lantern she carried dimmed, and the other lanterns followed suit. A hush spread across the marsh, a stillness that pressed against Alvar's chest. A voice, low, cold, without form, echoed from everywhere at once. You disturb the balance. Alvar swallowed. I only remember. That's all I've ever done. You remember, it hissed, but remembering is dangerous. Names forgotten must remain buried. Grief must stay silent. The veil preserves what you cannot. The Clean lifted her lantern higher. The flame flared, brighter than the night, and the veil recoiled. For the first time, it seemed hesitant. Alvar felt it then, the power of what he carried. Not a sword, not magic, memory, names, faces. Every child lost to Layman Vale, every echo born, every unspoken hymn, he carried them in his mind. The marsh trembled, fog thickened, lengthened, revealing hundreds of tiny lights, lanterns that had never existed before. The bone lantern procession had grown. From the shadows, shapes emerged, not children, not spirits. Memory made solid, the ungrieved, the unremembered, walking in step with who cleaned. The veil twisted around them, a living wall of darkness. It sought to reclaim the forgotten, but each name Alvar whispered, each memory he held, pushed the darkness back. A child stepped forward from the procession, tiny, pale, stitched at the mouth, little Belle. She looked at Alvar with eyes that knew everything. A single bell in her collar rang softly. The Clean spoke without moving her lips. Balance is not broken, it is rewritten. The veil pulsed once more, then retreated into the fog. A hush fell. Even the marsh seemed to breathe again. Alvar sank to his knees, exhausted but aware. The bone lantern procession would continue, but it had changed. Where grief had once been denied, remembrance now walked, step by step, through the fog, through the marsh, through the veil itself. And somewhere in the distance, a bell rang, a sound not of mourning, but of promise. Chapter 18. The lights beneath Hollow Wind. The first lantern was seen swaying near the edge of the drought fen, a place long considered silent, forgotten, where the veil thins and the air never quite warms. Locals claimed it was marsh gas, or a trick of their eyes, but the light did not drift, it walked. From a distance, It glowed faintly, like a cradle rocking in the fog. Closer, the shapes became clear. Child-sized figures in faded mourning shrouds. Silent, barefoot, eyes closed. Each held a bone-handled lantern, pulsing with a dim, blue flame. The bones were mismatched, centuries old, like a chorus of forgotten graves. No voices called out. No footprints marred the mud, only the faint chime of vertebrae strung as wind bells around their necks. They passed the old well, and it began to weep. Not water, not mud, something heavier. Judges and agents who watched later described a weight in the air, a memory pressing down. They could not look directly. The veil itself seemed to shiver. By dusk, one child vanished. No struggle, no trace. Only a lantern remained, swinging slowly in the mist. The wind carried a name, whispered, fragile, yet sharp. Ellen. From the shadows, Judge Ella wrote in her journal, "They are not coming for us. They are coming for those we should have mourned." The procession continued southward, through hollow wind, toward Lehman Vale, and the Vale followed, bending memory in its wake. Chapter 19, Names and Smoke. We arrived on the 7th dusk. The Vale was restless. The marsh rippled, forming patterns that looked like writing. Judge Iller attempted veil spraying. Her reflection in the divination basin blinked before she did. It was younger, sadder, not her own face. Agent Tenware, a salt forger, laid its protective lattice along the path of the lanterns. By morning, it was carefully removed, not broken, not destroyed, coiled again, like a sleeping infant. A message appeared on a lily pad, traced in dry blood. "You forgot them." 3 hours later, the first child of Hollow Wind disappeared. The Rick Andel, age 9, born during a failed eclipse. His grave had never existed, until now. We found his shoes, we found his voice, caught in the reeds, repeating his mother's lullaby, but not the child, never the child. By the 9th dusk, 12 lanterns moved through the fog. All witnesses reported the same pattern. Children vanish after dusk, no veil tear, no struggle, only absence, and a new lantern appearing in its place. The lights formed a line. All was from smallest to tallest. All was moving toward the marsh's heart, swaying, silent, never blinking. We set a trap, a circle of veil-threaded runes, a course of saltbinders. Judge Illa recited the mourner's Bane oath. It did not stop them. They paused at the edge of the circle. A girl stepped forward, her mouth stitched, fingers broken. She held out her lantern. Inside, not flame, a single name whispered in chorus. Ellen. Scribe Emrich tore out his own tongue. He tried to give it to the lantern. When restrained, he wrote only one sentence before his eyes turned to ash. "They are not coming for us. They are coming for those we should have mourned." The bone lanterns were not leading us away. They were leading us back. Chapter 20, Lantern number 13. The 13th lantern arrived during the full black moon. It bore no bone, no child. It hovered. Inside the flame, red thread knotted itself, a funerary weave, used only in unsanctioned rituals. Judge Iller approached. The flame dimmed. Reflected in the lantern's glass was thereon, smiling. Behind him, hundreds of lanterns stretched into darkness, pulsing like a heartbeat, whispering names not yet spoken. And then a word echoed through the judge's mind, louder with each pulse. "Remember." She collapsed. When she awoke, her veins had turned silver. Her voice was gone. Her last written order. "Do not follow the lights. They are not leading you away. They are leading you back." The Bone Lantern procession was no longer isolated. Wherever grief had been denied, wherever mourning had been suppressed, wherever names were buried too shallow, the procession grew. These were not ghosts, not spirits, not revenants. They were echoes of the ungrieved, and they were lighting the way. Chapter 21, The Echo-Born. The court now refers to the children of Lehman Vale as Echo-Born. They are not undead, not ghosts. They are memory made heavy. Grief refused its rest, and memory, when denied, does not fade, it walks. Caretakers who survived the veil went mute, not from trauma, not from injury, by weight. Their tongues turned to stone in sleep, their teeth crumbled. They dreamed of being small, alone, buried face down. Upon waking, they remembered nothing of themselves, only fragments of others, names, faces, forgotten. Some scrawled these names on walls, child names, names that never existed on paper. The court declared Lehman Vale a red silence zone. No rites allowed, no excavation, no naming, Those who spoke the names aloud found mirrors cracking. Fireplaces went cold. Shadows arrived early. Even now, red thread appears in the trees. Sometimes it hums, sometimes it tightens. A warning, a marker, all him waiting to be finished. Alvertanic, the one who looked back, remains the sole living witness. He stands outside the collapsed chapel, eyes closed, a sprig of lavender in one hand, a bone doll wrapped in red silk in the other. He whispers, "Little Belle is coming back. She was the first to go, and the last to be forgotten." Chapter 22, Little Belle. Little Belle was not the first to die, but she was the first to be unremembered. Her name was never spoken, not given in play. The others, gray, blue, thread, ash, kept silence, and slowly, she stopped casting shadows, stopped breathing in the spaces between them. She appeared as memory made form, 6 years old, pale as chalk, frosted glass over her eyes, a brass bell stitched to her collarbone, every movement, a whisper, every whisper, a name forgotten. Her mouth was sewn with red silk, not to silence, but to restrain. She walked where no one spoke, where grief was denied, where mourning had been buried with a wrong name, and in those spaces, she became voice. Outside the ruins of Layman Vale, the bell garden waited, tiny brass bells beneath softened earth. Each rang, despite rust and soil, each called a name. Corridors bloomed where she passed, portraits reversed on the walls, charcoal scrawled beneath them. She remembered them. Why didn't you? 13 residents woke with red-threaded mouths. All could hum, all became part of her hymn. Where ash walks among the misnamed dead, Little Belle walks in the silences where no one spoke. She is the whisper before remembrance, the hush before the hymn, the echo of all forgotten children. The court warns, even the smallest name, when forgotten, grows sharp in the dark. Little Belle carries the warning in every step, every bell chime a memory, every memory a weight. Chapter 23, The Lights Beneath Hollow Wind. The first lantern appeared at the edge of Drought Fen, a place of silence, forgotten by maps and memory. From a distance, it looked like marsh gas, but it did not drift. It walked, child-sized figures, shrouded, barefoot, lanterns made of bone, pulsing blue from within. No voices, no footprints, only the chime of vertebrae strung as wind bells, the fen wept beneath their passing. By the 7th dusk, the veil itself stirred. Marsh ripples spelled words in patterns. You forgot them. Agent Tenwayer's protection lattice was removed, coil by coil, as if by invisible hands. A boy vanished that night. The Rick Andel, age 9. His grave had never existed. Only his shoes remained, his voice trapped in the reeds, repeating a lullaby, but the boy himself was gone. By the 9th dusk, 12 lanterns moved in perfect line, smallest to tallest, toward the heart of the marsh. No blinking, no deviation. One held out a lantern. Inside, a single name whispered in chorus, Ellen. The 13th lantern arrived on the black moon. No bone, no child, a flame twisted with red thread. Judge Iller saw herself reflected, yet younger, sadder, blinking before she did. Hundreds of lanterns stretched into darkness, each pulsing like a heartbeat, each whispering a name not yet spoken. The word echoed through her mind. Remember, veins silvered, voice gone, last order written. Do not follow the lights. They are not leading you away. They are leading you back. Wherever grief is denied, where names are buried too shallow or too soon, the bone lantern procession grows. These are not ghosts, not spirits, not revenants. They are echoes of the ungrieved, and they light the way. The Blood Veil Court files this under Veil Link manifestation. Class 2 IV, escalating, case file 004, active, entity count, unknown, direction, southbound, destination, Layman Vale, next Veil convergence, 6 nights. Grief buried does not die, it waits, it grows teeth.